So part 1 of this video was made in 2011. Obviously, I didn't quite know what I was doing back then. And 48,000 views later, I finally decided that I really should figure out part 2 of this video. People have only been waiting 13 years after all. So at long last, here I am, coming back to this video that I first made for YouTube as one of the early videos on this channel. So part 1 of this video, which by the way is linked above, I explored what the typical BaZi consultant does as a preliminary evaluation of a chart, what I like to call the BaZi homework. A lot of students underestimate the value of a red pen and a printed chart in the analysis process. When you're starting out, it's important to go through those processes of marking out and identifying the interactions, the day master, all the stuff I kind of do on my Strength of the Day Master videos, because no one starts out at Da Vinci Code level from day one, okay? So in this video, I want to move to the kind of analysis that a professional consultant would actually get on once they've already done all the initial homework as indicated in part 1. So you're thinking, okay, we're going to learn some serious tricks about how to analyze a chart. The truth is there are no serious tricks per se. The fundamental difference between being able to analyze a BaZi chart and getting a bunch of technical gobbledygook comes down to essentially knowing what it is we're trying to find out from the BaZi chart. So if you like, you have to pick a topic you're trying to answer or pick a question you're trying to answer before you can actually get an answer. We do not wade right into the chart and start talking about what is going on. We already know from the previous review that the chart is missing an element, namely metal, and that wood is strong thanks to the partial 3 harmony combination, which I'm going to mark out here for you guys. Okay. We also know fire is quite strong because there is a partial 6 harmony combination that produces fire in the chart. So we know all this stuff. Yes, there's some interactions also going on aside from the combos. There is a combination in the stems between the day master and the jiat wood in the month branch. But we're actually not going to talk about these things unless we have a specific reason to reference them. Instead, one of the first things we're actually going to do is discern this person's character. Now, this we can do without a question for reference. Now, most BaZi students conveniently skip over a discussion about character. Perhaps because they think that character is like a no-brainer, easy topic, or they think that people know themselves really well, or they think that character doesn't produce any real juicy secrets in a chart, and surely clash, combo, and all those other interactions are the sexy topics to talk about and what people want to know. The truth is, character is where it begins and where it all ends. What happens to a person is one aspect of the chart, but the deciding factor on whether or not they are able to cope with certain challenges and excel in life comes down to character, which, newsflash, most people actually don't know their own character that well. Now, when we determine character, the first port of call is always the month branch. Specifically, it's not the time to explain why, so just go with the flow here, the main chi in the month branch. This is what determines the structure of the chart. The main chi of the month branch is a person's fundamental personality. And we discern this by determining what is the 10 god that is represented by the main chi of the month branch. In this case, the main chi of the month branch is Ting Fire. For Chi Earth Day Master, Ting Fire represents the indirect resource star. So from there, we move on to the question, what is the personality of a person with an indirect resource structure? To know this, we must have a good understanding of the indirect resource star. Now here again is where most newbies get stuck. They either don't know the star very well, not unusual as the indirect resource star is one of the more difficult stars to understand, or they only know a few attributes. In turn, this creates a situation where reading the personality becomes limited because the knowledge about the fundamental qualities of the star is limited. If you need a refresher on the topic of the resource star, I have linked a brief segment from my 10 Gods Redux video class above. So back to this chart. If you're on wobbly ground with the 10 gods, at the very least, try to make sure you know 3 attributes of each of the 10 gods. It will make for a very good first step in using structure to understand character. So if we look at the indirect resource star, the 3 attributes that we associate with it typically are great EQ, an eccentric nature, and a person who operates on feelings rather than logic. Indirect resource types are usually dreamers and great optimists. Now, we're not saying if this is a good or a bad thing when they have this personality, we're just saying this is what this person's personality is. Now, we can't just give a person 3 personality attributes and then move on. then need to put together a little bit more information from the chart in combination with what we know about the person from their structure. So here is where we utilize, in tandem with the structure, the information we derive from part 1 of the video, namely the partial wood frame combination and the missing metal element. Wood represents the officer element for Chi of Daymaster, while metal represents the output element for Chi of Daymaster. Now, here is where it gets tricky. Putting together these elements in combination with the basic personality of the person in order to derive an accurate personality requires some appreciation for how certain personality traits drive each other. In this chart, we have strong officer because of the wood frame, but zero output. Strong officer makes individuals very controlling, both towards themselves and towards others, as officer is a star we associate with authority and discipline. In many aspects, this is incongruous with the fundamental personality as expressed by the structure, which is indirect resource. Indirect resource types tend to be very forgiving and generally quite loose with rules and regulations because they like to fudge things. An eccentric by nature person doesn't really give much of a hoot about the rules, they're kind of living in their own world most of the time. So when you link up the two stars that don't seem to be very congruous with each other, you naturally get a very difficult personality. Here's a person who fixates over the irrelevant details and tries to make other people follow their strange ideas or rules. They will talk about the proper way of doing things and be very particular about protocol, but be highly forgiving on themselves or their favorites when it comes to breaching of the rules or protocols. If this person is your boss, they effectively personify the saying, "Do as I say, not what I do." Now, we can then further add on a layer that can be derived from the absence of metal, which is the output star. Output fundamentally controls communication skills, and a lack of output entirely means poor communication skills. These are people who know what they want but simply cannot express out the instructions in a logical way so that other people can understand what they want. Going back to this person, if they were your boss, they would make the rules but fail to tell you what they are or why they exist. And then they would fault you for the mistakes you made, despite the fact that their rules are unclear or badly explained. If this person is not in a position of authority, they will act like they are in charge, especially if they have some kind of title. But their work will be rather messy, if not subpar quality, and they will always have an excuse why something didn't happen that has nothing to do with them and everything to do with how the system doesn't suit their needs. And they certainly have no idea how to solve any problems, since the absence of output denotes a lack of problem-solving ability. However, the significant amounts of officer with resource means they are extremely good at complaining about the problems. Now, most people will want to know how many of the conclusions are derived from the basic elements of the 10 gods. A lot of it is putting together personality traits and understanding how they manifest when put together. Indirect resource people are highly sensitive since they are EQ and emotion driven. Sensitive people get upset over all kinds of things, but it's the ones with authoritarian attributes that tend to complain openly. Bossy complainers who can't complain well come across as whiners who don't want to help themselves. We could keep going on, but I think the key takeaway here is that any understanding of character requires a good comprehension of the 10 gods. But you can't just know the 10 gods, you have to know which attributes are polar opposites and which attributes complement each other. You then have to put together all the information in the chart and extrapolate how those different elements would work together. So reading character is the most fundamental part of BaZi, and it is also the most difficult aspect of BaZi to master. In that respect, analyzing a chart based on an actual question is much easier for most beginners. It is also why I encourage people to have the questions written down. But then again, it isn't as simple as yay or nay, good or bad. For example, a question about this person's career might relate to their success in their chosen field. But we can't answer that question unless we know what that person's job is and what is their definition of success. But we can conclude from a basic analysis that they will perpetually have problems with staff. This is because the output star is missing and the output star correlates with staff. Since the wood element is strong and associates with the officer star, we can conclude that this person is probably better off in a job where they are managing things, as opposed to people, rather than a job where they have to solve problems or communicate important matters. However, the problem with the chart is the structure is that of indirect resource. By and large, indirect resource individuals tend to be careless and lax with important details, but not lax about minor details. So we can conclude that the person needs to be in an industry where what matters are the seemingly irrelevant. For example, the culinary or hospitality fields, where the experience is what matters the most. This has been a pretty long segment already, so I think we're going to need part 3 to delve into some other aspects of the chart, such as the wealth and relationship considerations. Hopefully, it will take me not too long to get to that. You've been listening to The Barter Queen, and this is part 2 of How to Analyze a Barter Chart.